Well, good morning. Welcome. We're doing every other week Bible, and I thought it'd be fun to do one on Bible and marriage. A friend of mine who's a retired pastor, not the one that's sitting right there, but another one, saw my topic and sent me an email. And it started like a lot of things I get started. It started saying, you know, the secret to a happy marriage, let me tell you what it is. My wife and I have been married for 56 years. And when we got married, we made a vow to each other that one day a week we would commit to something fun. You know, going for a hike, dancing, ice cream, something. One day a week we committed to have something fun. And this has really been good for us. She goes on Tuesday and I go on Wednesday. So there's a lot of snarky humor about marriage for a reason. And then some stuff isn't funny. So I thought about this. Kate Bowler was with me Monday week prior. And in one of her podcasts, she talks to Beth Moore, who's like one of the most popular Christian writers ever. And what they talk about is pretty interesting because Beth Moore was, probably the most popular Bible teacher like for decades and a Southern Baptist. And in this podcast, she confesses that she was under a lot of pressure from the Southern Baptist men leaders to do two things. One is to present that she had a very happy marriage, and two, to teach that the Bible teaches you how to have a very happy marriage. Well, her own marriage, she was actually in an abusive relationship, and she got out of that, and she married another man. I love the way she described it. She said, it's such a really difficult marriage, but every now and then we look at each other and like, we're still here, you know, which is good. But then what does the Bible have to say about happy marriage? I remember years ago, a colleague of mine in ministry said, I'm going to teach a Bible series on how to have a happy marriage. And I said, what are you going to find in the Bible? Like, what's in there? He said, oh, there's a lot. Anyway, I've not quite found it yet, in all honesty. So I wanted to kind of ramble through marriages in the Bible and kind of see what's there. It's pretty interesting. It's pretty funny. It tells us a lot about the Christian life, even if you're single and not married, or if you're formerly married, or any of those things. So I think it's cool. The first kind of marriage, I guess, in the Bible is Adam and Eve. I mean, I'm not sure they had a wedding, but they're the only two there. They're naked and not ashamed, of course. And what happens in their marriage is Rabbi Jonathan Sachs talks about responsibility and leadership. He said, all of us are leaders. You may think, well, I'm not in charge of a big organization. But he says, you have a responsibility for leadership, maybe in your family, maybe with friends, maybe in a friendship. We have a responsibility to be leaders, and it's all about taking responsibility. Adam and Eve fail. Why? They eat the fruit. God comes down and says, what did you do? And, of course, Adam says, well, the woman that you gave me, she gave me the fruit. And then God said to the woman, what is this you have done? The woman said, the serpent did it. So both of them fail to take responsibility. Adam throws Eve under the bus. How many women in history have been blamed for, the failures of their husbands, politically and otherwise? In Genesis chapter 4, this is pretty interesting. We learned that in verse 17, so you got Adam, if you're a literalist, Adam and Eve, they're the only two people, and they have two kids, Cain and Abel, but you lose Abel, so Cain's the only guy left. And then in verse 17, suddenly it says, and Cain knew his wife. Like, where'd she come from? But as you know, I'm not a Bible literalist. What I believe is that people evolved the way that people evolved, the way science teaches us, and gradually there was a dawning of spirituality, awareness, whatever, in humanity. And Adam and Eve are representative of the first people that come along that way, and so it's not a problem that you have Cain and there's actually a marriageable woman. She might not have wanted to marry a murderer. I wonder if he revealed that to her. I murdered my brother. Will you marry me? Right? That'd be a good question. We come to Abraham and Sarah, and I remember growing up, I thought, oh, Abraham is just one of the greats. Abraham was, in a lot of ways, a terrible person, right? So in Genesis chapter 12, God's called Abram, and he goes with Sarah. He's going to a land. He's following God's calling, which is great. But then there's a famine in the land, Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there. When he was about to enter Egypt, he said to Sarah, his wife, I know that you are a woman beautiful to behold, right? Like a compliment. It's great. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife, and they will kill me, but they'll let you live. Say you are my sister, so it may go well with me because of you. Like, just a lovely marital dynamic. And of course, the Pharaoh tries to take her as his wife because she's just Abraham's sister. What a mess. Things get worse for them because over in chapter 16, of course, God has promised Abraham that he'd be the father of many children. Sarah's really old, past childbearing. And so we come to this little episode in Genesis 16. Sarah bore him no children. She had an Egyptian maid whose name was Hagar. Sarah said to Abram, behold, now the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go into my maid, so I shall obtain children by her. Abram says, okay. He went into Hagar, she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt upon her mistress, right? So Hagar's like, oh, God up there, does that. But then Sarah dealt harshly with her. Hagar winds up banished to the wilderness. It's all not going well. It raises a question of what happens when a third person is introduced into a marital relationship, right? And it can be, I was reading something the other day about the role of online pornography and marriage. It's kind of introducing another character into the relationship. But sometimes the adultery can be, with work, or something. There are all kinds of things where something else invades the relationship and takes on priority. I love this in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 9. It's not talking about marriage, but it might apply to marriage. We had this read at our wedding. You remember that, Lisa? Really? Yeah. They read this. I was kind of in a bit of a fog, but I picked it out ahead of time, so I know. So Ecclesiastes 4:9 says, two are better than one because they have a good reward for their toil. If one falls, the other will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls and has no one to lift him up. Again, if two lie down together, they are warm. How can one be warm alone? And though a man might prevail against one who is alone, two will withstand him. And here's the punchline. A threefold cord is not quickly broken. Right, so it might be some kind of ideal to think about, God is the third in a relationship. That could be a friendship. It could be a marriage. Walter Wangerin, in my favorite marriage book, and it's not like I've read 100 marriage books, so I can't pretend that it's the best one, but it's the best one I personally have read, and I've recommended it to a lot of people. It's called As for Me and My House. It's funny, it's moving, it's humble and realistic. It doesn't give you pressure that, if you're not giddy happy after a week and you've read this book, it's okay. You could be like Beth Moore and her husband, we're still here, and there's some virtue to that. He says it's always helpful in a relationship to think a mistake that people make. Friends do this, but certainly in marriages this happens. And I always tell people this in premarital counseling. They come in, and sometimes when I ask them questions, they'll say, this is going to be a 50-50 relationship. And this is a recipe for foolishness, right? Because you're going to be 50-50, but you look up about 3 days later and you think, I think I'm pulling about 70 here. And she's maybe only, 20, I don't know. And then I tell people this as they go, we're going to be 100. And that's a fool's errand as well. What Wangerin says can be helpful is instead of just the two of you, you imagine that there's a third entity in the room, and it's got a big capital R, it's the relationship, right? So the question is, what will I do for the relationship? The answer should be most anything, because if that thing's healthy, then everybody else is healthy. If that thing is unhealthy, it doesn't matter who's doing for the other person. It's like this idea of, who's the third in the relationship. Genesis 24, we come to Rebekah, the next generation down. Abraham, Sarah finally have Isaac. He marries Rebekah. There's a marvelous it's the most romantic courting story in the whole Bible, Genesis 24. Rebekah looks across the field and she sees this guy, and he looks across the field and he sees her and he thinks, wow, she's really beautiful. And he pushes a rock just to show off of how strong that he is. And so they meet and they get acquainted. He's purchased a gold ring from somebody in case things go well. And in verse 47 of Genesis 24, it says that Isaac put a ring on her nose. And there they are. And they wind up married, and he married very poorly, right? Because they have children, they have twins, right? Jacob and Esau, they're fighting already in the womb. They come out, they fight, and Rebekah has a favorite, right? She loves Jacob. That's her favorite child. He's a mama's boy. He's a house boy. Esau is a man of the fields. He's more like his father. And you know the story. Rebekah helps Jacob plot how to rip off his brother and how to deceive his father. Like, great wife here, great mother here. Marilyn Robinson, the great novelist, wrote Gilead, other wonderful books. She's just written a book on Genesis that Christian Century asked me to review, and it's a beautiful book, as you can imagine. Marilyn's book, not just Genesis. And in it she says, whom did Rebekah love? Rebekah didn't love anybody, right? You can't say she loved her children. You can't really say that she loved Jacob if she drew him into this kind of deception. I will teach you how to deceive your father. Do you love a son that you would do that with? Jacob grows up in such a situation, he should know better, but of course he doesn't, and he marries, and things go badly for him as well. You know the story in Genesis 29. Jacob meets a girl, Rachel. She's lovely. I love it. Verse 16 of Genesis 29. Laban had two daughters. The name of the older was Leah. The name of the younger was Rachel. The language here is wonderful. Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful. Like, her eyes were weak. It's not like she needed glasses, right? Her eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful and lovely. Jacob loved Rachel. Laban says, if you serve me for 7 years, you can marry my daughter, Rachel. So he worked 7 years. That's a long time. When I wanted to marry Lisa, I didn't have to work for her dad for 7 years. So, we just got married. So he does the 7 years, and so then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife that I may go into her, for my time is completed. So Laban had gathered all the men of the place, made a feast, but in the evening he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. Like, it's in the dark. He substitutes Leah for Rachel, and it's dark, and Jacob doesn't know. In the morning, behold, it was Leah. And Jacob said to Laban, what is this you have done to me? Didn't I serve you for Rachel? Why did you deceive me? It's funny. And you have to wonder, how did that happen? Stanley Hauerwas, he's retired now, Christian ethicist at Duke, wrote several essays on kind of Christian marriage. And one of his premises is, you always marry the wrong person. Don't nod too energetically. Billy, I saw you. You always marry the wrong person. And I've had people argue with me, oh, I married the right person. Okay, well, good for you. That's fine. But you always marry the wrong person. And that, I don't know what he means by that. Somehow it's like, if you think it's the right, I think it's more the premise of what would the right person be? And it's usually probably some kind of a self-indulgent fantasy that you have, that right person will feed into your picture. And nobody quite fits that, so you've got to learn to love each other. I love the thing in, I'll quote it wrong, in Fiddler on the Roof, right? Tevi and Golda, their marriage was arranged, and they have all these children, and there's trouble in the town, and their daughters are getting married, and all the stuff's going on, but then one day Tevi looks at Golda. I should sing it for you, but I won't. And he asked, do you love me? She says, do I love you? For 25 years, I've milked your cows and cleaned your house and cooked your meals and raised your children. Why ask about love? He said, but do you love me? I just want to know. But then what's interesting is he talks about the day that they married, which was the day that they met, an arranged marriage. He said, I was scared, I was nervous, and I told my father, I'm scared, nervous, I don't know what to do. And he said, my father told me, you will learn to love one another, right? I mean, if you love one another, it's something that you learn. It's something that comes over time. I love it. You always marry the wrong person. Exodus chapter 3, Moses, he grows up in Egypt, then he goes off to the wilderness, comes upon a man with his daughters, saves them from an attacker, and he marries one of them, Zipporah. It's a great name. It means little bird. And the two funny Zipporah things, I think, one is, Moses has never been circumcised. They haven't gone to Mount Sinai yet to learn that men are supposed to be circumcised. But God, when Moses is still in the wilderness after the burning bush, he's trying to get Moses ready to go be the leader, to take the people out of Egypt and go to Mount Sinai. So he says, I'd like you to have your wife Zipporah to circumcise you. And in, this is like grown-up talk here. This is fun. So Joseph Heller, who wrote Catch-22, wrote a wonderful, side-splitting funny book called God Knows. And it imagines various characters, in heaven kind of reflecting back over their lives. And so he has Moses reflecting over this moment when, his wife comes at him with a sharp flint. And he's kind of running and hiding, but she finally says, well, God said we have to do this. And she does. And then Moses, famous for stuttering, says, it hurts. It's funny in the book. And then the other funny thing to me about Zipporah is in the Charlton Heston movie, The Ten Commandments, right? And it's a wonderful movie, and some of it's just corny. So Moses, he looks pretty normal. He goes up on the mountain. He experiences God at the burning bush. And when he comes back down, suddenly his hair is white, right? And I guess that's what the presence of God does. But what's funny is he comes down the mountain, and Zipporah sees him, and she looks and she says, Moses, your hair. And in the 50s, that wasn't funny, right? That's what's so interesting is cultures change. Now it just seems ridiculously funny. Other marriages that we come to, Ruth and Boaz. This is really something, right? So Ruth's a Moabite girl. There's a famine in Bethlehem. Naomi, she goes to Moab. Her son's married, but they die. Orpah, that's kind of interesting. Orpah's the other daughter-in-law. Oprah Winfrey was named for Orpah, but they misspelled it. How did that happen? Orpah stays home, but then Ruth says the famous thing, wherever you go, I will go. Your people will be my people. They use that at marriages, but it's actually, daughter-in-law with her mother-in-law. And so they come back, and they're destitute, but there's this rich guy in town named Boaz. And Naomi, I just love this advice. She says to Ruth, she says, is not Boaz our kinsman? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash, therefore, anoint yourself, put on your best clothes, and go down to the threshing floor, but don't make yourself known to the man until he's finished eating and, importantly, drinking. When he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go, uncover his feet, and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. That's so romantic, isn't it? I'm trying to find a happy marriage in here. It hasn't happened yet. 1 Samuel chapter 1. There was a certain man of Ramathaim Zophim of the hill country of Ephraim whose name was Elkanah. Elkanah had two wives. That's one of the things we always say, biblical marriage. There are multiple wives, concubines. It's a mess. Anyway, he had two wives. The name of one was Hannah. The name of the other was Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. And Peninnah used to provoke Hannah sorely, to irritate her, because the Lord had closed her womb. So it's like, nah, I have children and you don't. You can imagine the dynamics at home. So it went on year after year. As often as she went up to the house of the Lord, she used to provoke her. So Hannah wept and would not eat. I love this. This is one of my favorite moments in the whole Bible. Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? Why do you not eat? Why is your heart sad? Am I not more to you than 10 sons? I love that. Like, you got me. And the answer to his question is what? No. And that's no skin off him. It's that no What's the lesson there? Like, no single relationship is enough. Like, we're not wired that way. No one person can be enough. It may not be that you need children, but you need other people. That's why I don't want to offend anybody. My children's generation, when they get married, they say, I married my best friend. And my view of that has always been, I married somebody, and because of that, I really need my best friend, who's another person, right? It's a guy that I've known for a long time, and we can actually talk about our marriages in only flattering ways, of course. Lisa's in the room here, so. David. The one thing that really does bug me, and it's bugged me for a long time, is a lot of spiritual writers, I think Beth Moore even did this, they make David out to be, this sweet, holy, prayerful, spiritual person. And I just have you read the story of David? He's a terrible person. He's a successful politician and warrior, sort of. But he has issues with that. So in 2 Samuel 6, he's got the Ark of the Covenant, and he's gradually trying to bring it to Jerusalem. And so we have this moment. They're carrying the Ark. 2 Samuel 6:14, David danced before the Lord with all his might. He was girded in a linen ephod. And in the ancient world, you'd hear that and you'd think, he's a little underdressed for the occasion. Right? And so David returns after the dance. But Michal, David has married Michal. Why? Is he in love with Michal? Yeah, not sure. She is the daughter of King Saul. Like, these are marriages through history, that you marry the daughter of the king, and that puts you in line to be the prince. Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, how the king of Israel has dishonored himself today, uncovering himself today before the eyes of his servants, as one of the vulgar fellows shamelessly uncovers himself. David said to Michal, he's not going to put up with this crap. It was before the Lord. Like, it's not just that he puts her down, but he claims piety, right? It was before the Lord who chose me above your father and above all his house to appoint me as a prince. And then it says, Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no child to the day of her death. Which doesn't just mean, I think the implication isn't that she was suffering infertility. The implication is David refuses to treat her as a wife. I taught preaching one year down at Lutheran Seminary in Columbia, and a young woman chose this text for her sermon. I thought, what a text to preach on. It was one of the most magnificent sermons that I've ever heard. She basically, with a lot of pain that suggested maybe she had experienced cruelty from a man herself, just her sermon was, I am Michal. And then she really spoke on behalf of all women who have been belittled, mistreated, abused by husbands, boyfriends. David has another marriage coming up, Bathsheba. Bathsheba, of course, you know this. She's actually married to another man, Uriah. But David sees Bathsheba, and she's beautiful. Let me actually read the text. That it's worse than we think it is. 2 Samuel 11. It happened, I love that. It happened late one afternoon when David arose from his couch and was walking upon the roof of the king's house. If you come with me to Israel, I'll take you to the high place where the roof of the palace would have been, and you indeed look down on a whole village of rooftops that are there to this day. He saw from the roof a woman bathing, which would have been normal in those days, and the woman was very beautiful. David sent and inquired about the woman. One said, this is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah. So David sent messengers and not asked her to come. No. David sent messengers and took her. And she came, and he lay with her. And of course, she's pregnant, and then, oh my goodness, David's got to get rid of the husband, and so it's so cruel. He goes to Uriah, he calls him in from the battlefront and says, come in, go into your wife, have a drink on me, enjoy time with your wife. And Uriah says, no, the vow of soldiers is not to have sex during battle. I want to go back and fight for you. So David, that didn't work. So he writes a note. He says, take this to Joab, the commander. Well, Uriah is such a good soul, he doesn't read the note. What the note says is, put Uriah at the front of the battle where he's sure to be killed. I mean, what kind of person is David? So he carries the note, he is killed, and then David takes Bathsheba. A few years ago, I started calling Bathsheba the patron saint of the Me Too movement, right? And that's not, she was taken by a powerful man. Bathsheba. Solomon, 1 Kings chapter 11. This is one of David's sons, 1 Samuel chapter 11. This staggers the mind. King Solomon loved many foreign women, the daughter of Pharaoh, and a Moabite, an Ammonite, an Edomite. He had 700 wives. Good grief. And 300 concubines. But I don't think we're meant to say good grief. I think what the writer of 1 Kings is interested in this. And his wives turned away his heart. And they turned away his heart from God, from the true God. The Pharaoh's daughter simply, the text expounds on her at some length. The scandal was he married, it's a wise thing if you're a political leader to do what? To marry Pharaoh's daughter. Why? That cements an alliance with Pharaoh. You get increased trade, you get military protection on your southern border when you're married to the Pharaoh's daughter. Brilliant political move. But he brings the Pharaoh's daughter into the holy city of Jerusalem, and who comes with her? Well, all of the Egyptian priests and diviners and soothsayers, and a temple is built to Egyptian gods right there in the holy city of Jerusalem, because she needed that, being an Egyptian girl. They turned away his heart. Jezebel, 1 Kings 21, there are names that just are never again used. Judas, nobody's going to name their child Judas, right? And Jezebel is one of those. And Ahab is the king, and Jezebel says to Ahab, there's a piece of property that adjoins the palace property. I'd like you to go and buy that for me. It belongs to a guy named Naboth. So Ahab goes to Naboth and says, let me buy your property. Naboth said, the Lord forbid that I should give you the inheritance of my fathers. There are always holy people around these guys who want to do the right thing, and they refuse to just cave in. So Abraham went to his house vexed and sullen because of what Naboth the Jezreelite had said to him. He said, I will not give you the land. He lay down on his bed and turned away his face. He would eat no food. Jezebel, his wife, came to him and said, why is your spirit so low? He said, he wouldn't sell me the vineyard. Jezebel said to him, do you not now govern Israel? She's like, you're the king. And so he just takes the land by killing Naboth. And there's probably something there about any relationship, any life that is based on acquisition. We must acquire more and more and more, and the trouble that comes from that. It can be toxic in a relationship even. Hosea, the prophet Hosea marries, I remember reading this the first time, laughed out loud. Hosea comes along in the 8th century. The Israelites are worshiping other idols. They're being terrible people. It's one of the shockers in the Bible. Hosea chapter 1. The Lord spoke to Hosea. The Lord said to Hosea, go take yourself a wife of harlotry and have children of harlotry, for the land commits great harlotry by forsaking lords. So he went and took, her name is Gomer. It's just lovely. Like I grew up on Gomer Pyle, right? It's like Gomer. It was a woman's name back in those days. And she bore him a son. But then she has other children that are clearly by other men. And so what's interesting there is, the question is, did God really tell him to marry a prostitute? Or did he marry a woman and then she was unfaithful, but he saw in that some message from God about the infidelity of God's people? And it makes me wonder about in relationships, when it goes badly, instead of just thinking, oh, my relationship has gone badly, is there anything that we can see in it that shows us something about human nature, about human brokenness, about human sinfulness in general? Because that usually is the case. A lot of times people have a child, and a child will do something. And parents, one, blame themselves, and two, they think that their child is the only person in human history that has ever done this. And it's not just that many children have done this. A lot of times children do things like, what, drink too much, try drugs, or whatever, and not because they're wicked or that you failed them. There's a society that does this, and they just get swept up in it, sort of like everybody else. So in their brokenness, we see what's going on in the larger context. In a happier mode, if there's a happy marriage kind of thing, I don't know if it's even a marriage, it's more a courtship. In the Bible, we come to the Song of Solomon, the Song of Songs. I joke about this sometimes. I haven't actually done this, but I joke about reading this to Lisa, on Valentine's Day or whatever. It's a series of poems. They probably were sung originally. And it's a man and a woman. They sing back and forth to one another, songs of love, songs of admiration. So chapter 4, the man singing to the woman, "Behold, you are beautiful, my love, you are beautiful. Your eyes are doves behind your veil. Your hair is like a flock of goats running down the slopes of Gilead. Your teeth are like a flock of shorn sheep that have come up from the washing, all of which bear twins. Not one of them is bereaved." What does that mean? I'll read it again. You weren't paying attention. I can tell. Your teeth are like a flock of shorn lambs that have come up from the washing. That might imply what? Think ancient world, like her teeth are probably white in an era of terrific tooth decay. All of which bear twins, not one of them is bereaved. She has all her teeth. That's kind of cool. In the ancient world, not many women would have all the. Your lips are like a scarlet thread. Your mouth is lovely. Your cheeks are like halves of a pomegranate behind your veil. Your neck is like the Tower of David, built for an arsenal. Your breasts are like two fawns, twins of a gazelle that feed among the lilies. I mean, it goes on and on like this. And then she responds. I know Lisa thinks these thoughts of me. My beloved is all radiant and ruddy, distinguished among 10,000. His head is the finest gold. His locks are wavy, black as a raven. His eyes are like doves behind springs of water. His cheeks are bed of spices. His lips are lilies. His arms are rounded gold. His body is ivory work. His legs are alabaster columns. That's me to a T. I meant to look it up ahead of time, and I forgot to. Jimmy Carter, thinking about Rosalind Carter's death, the beauty of their relationship, I think, is that Jimmy Carter unfailingly just praised Rosalind in front of any and everybody, and not in a gawky way. And he wrote her poetry. And I've got a whole book of it, poems that he wrote to his wife, and they just gush with, "You're so beautiful, I'm so fortunate to be with you." When I talk to married couples that are struggling, and I come in and I'll say, "Hey, what's going on?" They never say, "My problem is I get too much encouragement from my spouse." No one's ever said that. No one's like, "My spouse praises me too much." That's just always they lay off that. Often they say, "My spouse never really says anything nice about me. My spouse never compliments me." There's something in that, right? Even in a friendship, right? In a friendship, do you praise the other person? Do you identify gifts in them and lift those up? That's underdone, I think, in our culture, praising, encouraging. Mary and Joseph, we come to them, they're not really married yet, right? They're betrothed. And in Bible times, we hear betrothed and we think engagement. And if you break off an engagement, that's kind of like, "Oh, it's unfortunate. Had you spent money yet, on a venue? Had you started printing invitations?" We worry about those kinds of things. What are you going to do with the ring? Do you give it back? But in the biblical world, when you were betrothed, that was a legal relationship. And if you broke a betrothal, it was a divorce, right? So they're legally bound. And it's during that time that Joseph learns that she's with child. She learns that she's with child. What the angel asks of her, I've shared this with you a bunch of times, is it sounds unique, right? God asked Mary to be the mother of God's son. That's like the only time in history. That's amazing. She must be remarkable. But the principle in it is that Mary is asked what is asked of each one of us, and that is to let God take on reality in our lives through our bodies in all that we do. And there's something of that about a relationship. There's some other New Testament relationships that I think are fabulously interesting. So in Luke chapter 8, this is amazing. Jesus' disciples, we know their names, and we know that they are all men. How do we know that? You go to Myers Park, you know how you know this? They're in the stained glass windows, right? Looking very regal up there. 2 Jameses, by the way. Anyway. So male disciples, and the 12 is a loose number. Like that kind of represented the tribes of Israel. There are different names at different times. You can't count 12 or you're doubling names. So there were men who followed Jesus around. But I love what Luke tells us. Soon after, Jesus went on through the cities and villages, preaching and bringing the good news of the kingdom of God. The 12 were with him, but also some women. I mean, one of those questions is, were there women disciples? And if you just read the Bible straight, you don't have to do anything fancy. The answer is, of course there were. There were some women who had been healed of infirmities. Mary, called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had gone out. Now, first of all, what have you probably know this? Like, what was Mary's occupation? Like, what's your gut answer? You can talk. It's not a nice word. Nobody wants to say it, right? Probably, we say, oh, she must have been a prostitute. The Bible never says this, right? So that's a sign of kind of dirty minds going somewhere. Actually, Mary Magdalene here is counted among, I'll read the rest of it and then go back to her. Mary called Magdalene, from whom demons had gone out. Joanna, the wife of Chuza, Herod's steward, that'd be a really wealthy person, we'll get back to her. And Susanna, and many others, and then it adds, who provided for them out of their means. That would be pretty unusual in the ancient world. Women who could provide for some endeavor like this out of their means. So the implication is that Mary Magdalene would be a woman of some financial substance. For her to be called Mary Magdalene implies that she was a Mary of some notoriety in the village of Magdala. If you come with me to Israel, we go and visit Magdala. There was a thriving, Sue gets so excited when I bring up Magdala, because she's been there many times. There was a thriving fishing industry there that exported fish all over the known world at the time. You know, was Mary part of a business there that she had finances to be able to leave it and travel around but still be funding this effort? Of course, then you get the Da Vinci Code, and they got to get Jesus, married to Mary Magdalene. Like, oh, gosh. Yeah, there you go. So back to that. So Mary called Magdalene, from whom demons had gone out. Joanna, the wife of Chuza, Herod's steward. When you hear Herod's steward, we think, what was that? It turns out the Greek word is that what that would have meant was that he was King Herod's chief of the treasury. So this would be one of the 3 most powerful positions in the entire country, and the person who controlled what? The treasury. So this would be a person of immense substance. King Herod loathes Jesus and is already in pursuit of trying to track him down and eventually has him put to death, right? So his chief of the economy, Chuza, is married to a woman who has traipsed around the countryside after Jesus, whom Herod wants to have dead, right? So my question is, what's the pillow talk, if any, between Chuza and Joanna, right? I mean, this is shocking. That such a person would follow Jesus, right? Because she's clearly vested in Herod's enterprise. So what made her want to do that? Was Jesus so appealing? Was there some pain, some discomfort in her life, even a life of comfort and wealth, that made her able to traipse off after an itinerant preacher and be one who provided for him? Chuza probably thought, well, that's my money. You're giving to him. Paul talks about marriage in Ephesians chapter 5, and we can finesse this. I can finesse this. I have finessed this, but I mean, here it is. You got to do something with it. Be subject to one another, good, out of reverence for Christ. Wives, be subject to your husbands, as to the Lord. The husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church. His body is itself its Savior. As the church is subject to Christ, let wives also be subject in everything to their husbands. Why is that a problem? This is an audience participation moment.
Well, it's lopsided.
What'd you say?
It's lopsided. I mean, if it's just that the man is the head of the marriage, what about the woman?
Maybe God wished for things to be lopsided.
He speaks of all the parts of the body that have to be.
I mean, he goes on, husbands, love your wives, not be subject to your wives, but love your wives. Then he adds, as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Well, that's where you can finesse it right and say, well, Jesus actually sacrificially died for the church, and so men should sacrificially suffer and lose things for the spouse. What I want to do is be careful from recoiling against this just because we're modern people and we don't like it. Right? I want to respond to it theologically based on other stuff in the Bible, right? So what I wish I could question Paul about is when he says, wives, be subject to your husbands as to the Lord. I'd say to Paul, have you not noticed that most husbands are actually not much like the Lord? And I don't mean that just in a funny way. All husbands are what? Broken human beings, and when you give human beings power, this is a common thread through all of Scripture, when you give people power, they don't do well with power. They tend to abuse power. They tend to seize it. They tend to hurt, belittle, whatever, other people. So how do we account for that? And then just realistically, Lisa and I have talked about this a lot. We have relatives who, they believe this thing. The man is the head of the household. And a lot of times the man's just not equipped to be the head of the household. We have so many in our church. We have some husbands who are active in our church and the wife is not. That's a rarity, though. There are more wives who are active and the husband, I don't know, they're doofuses. They're just guys, like they can't help themselves. They play golf or whatever. I love Kate Bowler's answer the other way, by the way. The gender balance when she was here, like I predicted it would be 4-to-1 women. It was like 25-to-1 women. Like, good grief. Greg was here. That was good. And so I asked her this question, and I said, why are there, just so many more women? And she said, because women rock. And the audience erupted in applause. Like, that was a great answer. Anyway, I told her at the time, I've said many times, when I speak at any graduation, college or high school graduation, baccalaureates, whatever, I always throw in this line. I say, when you guys occupy positions, let's put the women in charge. And the reason is the men have had their turn and they've not done very well, so let's put the women in charge. And we can kind of chuckle about that, but you do think about it in a place like, I don't know, Gaza, Israel, Palestine, by rule, you put young moms with little children in charge. I think you'd have a very different outcome than having old military veterans on both sides who are guys who are in charge. So that's a thing. There's stuff in that Ephesians passage to be subject to one another. That's a thing. It's not about groveling, but it's about can I defer to the other? Can I humble myself to the other, not be humiliated by the other, but can I be subject to the other? That's sort of like asking the question of what's good for the relationship. What will I do for the relationship? Anyway, that's an important thing. We have, in the book of Acts, we have stories of 2 marriages, and they're very different. So the first marriage is Annanias and Sapphira. If you know this story, this is great. A man named Ananias, and this is, we just have read the passage where the early Christians, they were like kind of godly communists, if you will, right? They hold all their possessions in common. Nobody has private property. They pool all their possessions. This is what the early Christians did. So, right on the heels of that, it says, a man named Annanias with his wife Sapphira sold a piece of property, and with his wife's knowledge, he kept back some of the proceeds and brought only a part of it and laid it at the apostles' feet. Peter said, Ananias, why has Satan filled you to do such a thing? And if you know the story, they got struck dead. This is the word of God for the people of God. Do not hold your property back from Myers Park United Methodist Church. I think it's a good story, and it's not that you'll be struck dead, but it's that there's something deadly, there's something deadening about I matter, we matter more than God's work in the world. Well, we tend to do that. Like we're even schooled in church to do that. Like you take care of yourself, of course. You take care of yourself first. And then with what you have left over, you contribute some of that to the church or to people that are in need. But theologically, the Bible gives us a very different picture, is that it's actually all God's, right? And it's easy to make this case, what we determine as my needs. If you just travel around the world and look at what's going on with people, we have elevated so many luxuries into needs. And we know this, and we can nod, and it's just a humbling thing about ourselves. So you become St. Francis of Assisi tomorrow? Maybe not, but maybe you make progress over time, traveling a little lighter, thinking of more of what I have as God's versus mine, and then what's left goes for God. There's a different couple, Priscilla and Aquila. My friend Willie Jennings wrote a commentary on the book of Acts, and he says they're really the ideal Christian couple. That's pretty interesting. Acts 18:2. Paul goes to Corinth. He found a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, lately come from Italy, with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome. They were tent makers, like Paul. They had a profession in common. Priscilla and Aquila come to be great teachers in the life of the church. We can read about them in 1 Corinthians 16, other places. The cool thing is they are teachers in the church, so it's not just Aquila, whose wife Priscilla tags along, right? But it's Priscilla and Aquila who are the teachers. And the order, I think, matters. I think in the ancient world, people would say, why in the world don't they say Aquila and Priscilla instead of Priscilla? It's a little thing, but I think it's a big deal. This is written, Acts is written by the same person that wrote Luke. People can look at the Bible and say it's so backward in terms of gender relationship. But for the ancient world, Luke is revolutionary in so many cases. That's a little hint there. It's Priscilla and Aquila, and they are teachers in the church, woman and a man, doing this as a couple together. Luke's revolution, in Luke chapter 10, you have the great passage where Jesus goes to dinner at the home of Mary and Martha. And you know this story. Martha's in the kitchen doing what all women did in the ancient world, preparing food to entertain the men. A rabbi is visiting, and this was a common thing. If a rabbi came to your home, who would gather around to hear the rabbi teach and interact with him? Well, the men of the community, the neighbors, the men of the household, but neighbors would come, and the men would sit at the feet of the rabbi, and they would talk, and the women in the kitchen would prepare food and come out and serve them later. And Martha is apoplectic, though, because her sister Mary isn't helping her in the kitchen. Instead, she's sitting at the feet of Jesus. And she comes in and she says, she's really upset. And she thinks Jesus will say, Mary, get in the kitchen. But instead, Jesus says, Mary has chosen the better part. Like we hear that and we think, oh, that's so nice. In the ancient world, this was shocking. Like a woman is excused from the kitchen and can sit at the feet of a rabbi? So Luke's pretty revolutionary here. What time is it? What time?
8 minutes till.
Oh. Well, I had some other stuff, but let me ramble through this quickly. Thought about other kind of famous marriages in histories. You have the parents of St. Francis of Assisi, Pica and Pietro, but they had a strained marriage. Because Pietro is suing his son for giving all of the family wealth away, and he throws him in jail, and then Pica sneaks out at night and lets him out of jail. You can imagine they had a happy marriage. John Wesley was married, and oh my God, Carl's laughing. She actually died during his lifetime, and he didn't make it to the funeral. He was busy preaching, you know. He was a terrible husband. I just read Jonathan Ives' great biography of Martin Luther King, Coretta. I mean, there's a long-suffering spouse, right? There's something in the news in the Wall Street Journal the other day about Gary Chapman. You know, Gary Chapman wrote this 5 Love Languages book that people have found to be helpful, and there was an article that, who does this? Some researchers studied actually the human psyche and patterns in relationships, and they said, you know, his model doesn't actually work. How do they know this? Like, people have read this book and it's actually been helpful to them. I would say some people have read the book and it's actually destructive to them, right? Because what happens is, I don't know. I'm married to Jane Doe, and I say, my love language is saying nice things about you. And she says, my love language is doing nice things for you. And you're like, well, say some nice things about me. Well, that's not my love language. And you got a bigger fight than you had before they learned the love languages. Anyway, that's interesting. Lewis Smedes wrote this lovely thing, and I meant to run down the quote, but I can do it pretty much from memory. I'm thinking again about Beth Moore talking about her husband. They've had just a really hard, they both were from, you know, tough childhood relationships. So they've brought a lot. You bring that into your marriage. Whatever you grew up with, you drag, even if they're dead and gone, you drag those people in the room with you, and that it's been hard, but every now and then they take each other hand like, we're still here. Lewis Smedes says, he has this beautiful quote where he says, if you make and keep promises, if there's a ship you won't desert, if there's a cause you will not desert, if there's somebody that you will never abandon, if there are promises that you keep, then you are like God. Like, I love that. It's not that you are God, but when you make and keep promises, you are mirroring what God is most about, because God makes and keeps promises. And I had some notes here, even getting on down into, same gender marriage, but we'll have to do a whole nother session on that. There's not time to delve into that, but I will another day. That would really be fun, wouldn't it, to talk about that. I'll close with this. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, this always kind of gets me. You know, people read it at weddings. It's a little bit like if I say to someone, what is your favorite psalm? 99 out of 100 people say the 23rd. I don't think it's because it's their favorite. I think they just don't know another psalm, right? So it's their favorite. So I get these young couples, and I'll say, hey, here's the slot in the service for the scripture reading. Do you have something? This is making the Gox nervous. I'm going to marry their daughter. I say, she knows Bible. I say, is there a Bible passage? And they say, I think it's in Corinthians. Anyway, they're thinking of 1 Corinthians 13, and they want it read at their wedding. Of course, Paul didn't think, he's not writing Corinthians and says, I'd like to compose something now for couples, for when they get. He's talking about arguments within the church. And then he talks about love, but it actually applies well to weddings as well. But I always think, like, do you remember this? And do you actually parse this in the course of your marriage and your friendships? Does the church think about it? I don't hear it said much. When you have a neighbor that's getting on your nerves, do you ever think about 1 Corinthians 13, right? So it says things like, love is patient. We could just stop there. But we need not. Love is kind. Love is not jealous or boastful. It is not arrogant or rude. Here's a huge one. Love does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable. It is not resentful. It does not rejoice at wrong, but rejoices in the right. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Lovely words that we do well to ponder in every avenue of life. Okay, that's, I talked longer than I meant to, but it was just fun rambling through these things. You have any questions or anything we want to talk about while we're together before noon dawns upon us? Sue. Yeah. So there are, that's like a whole nother class, Sue. But there are two versions of that, and I'd have to look at it to be positive. But in Mark, which is earlier, Jesus sounds more, not lenient, that's not the right word, but more open, more flexible. And one of the things that I am open to believing, not everybody is, and that's fine, is that the words of Jesus, nobody was taking dictation while he was talking, right? And so people heard it and they're like, wow, that was amazing. And then later they try to tell it and try to remember it. And of course it's imperfect, but then they have some agendas that creep in as well. Matthew, among all four Gospels, veers way more legalistic than the others by far. You kind of read Matthew as a whole. Whenever Jesus says something in Matthew, he's got a little, there's not a lot of grace in there. Did that get bent about? I'd have no question that if Jesus were standing here, he'd say, I am really against divorce, right? And you have to remember, nobody I know is for divorce. It's like sort of being pro-choice and pro-life. I don't know anybody who loves abortion. Oh, abortion is wonderful. I don't know anybody who thinks that, right? So these are kind of tragic choices once you have two impossible choices. And Jesus over and over recognizes and has mercy on those who find themselves at the point of two tragic choices, right? At the same time, there's a lot of theological stuff that if people lived into that, and you got to have two people living into it, right? One person can't live into this alone. And Paul talks about being unequally yoked and that kind of stuff, right? But if you live into this, I mean, part of what you combat, if you're going to have a friendship, a marriage, anything, we're always competing with the way society looks at things. This is part of Kate Bowler's project, I think, right? Society says you have to have more and more, and you have to be just giddy happy, and everything just has to be wonderful. So I hear couples all the time when they come and they're in my office, and I'll ask, why do you want to get married? And they never have a good answer. The worst one, I'll get pegged to end the tape. Sometimes they say things like, we enjoy working out together. And I say, that's not enough. Trust me. And they'll talk about the love-making abilities of the other. I mean, it's stuff that makes your head hurt. But they often say something like, I've dated different people, but she's the one I think can make me happy. Well, in that sentence is the recipe for disaster, right? Because I've not yet met the person who can make another person happy, right? Even the goal of happiness is problematical, right? Because that's kind of like, I want to feel like this. And God asks us to be faithful, to be diligent, not to be miserable, to be joyful, which is pretty different, I think, from happy. And anyway, so kind of society's expectations and norms and what you see in a TV show and in a commercial look so very different from what a Christian marriage might look like. But to talk about Christian marriage, you can't go in the Bible and say, well, here's Christian marriage. You have to deduce it from a lot of things, right? Sort of sacrificial living, fidelity, when you make and keep promises, you're like God. Can you be humble? The fruit of the Spirit. Like, I want to do something on marriage. I talk about the fruit of the Spirit, like love. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, self-control. I mean, nobody comes to my office or have a marriage where I'm what? My spouse is too gentle with me. Like, no, that's not a thing. Sometimes it's my spouse is too strong. Right? Anyway, the noon has come. We'll keep meeting. In 2 weeks, we're going to have a program. I'm going to be out of town. Hugh Floyd is going to come. Great teacher, taught at Furman forever. He's going to do one on Bible and music. And we've been conferring over that. That's going to be really cool. He's really excited about it. So I hope you'll come for that. Anyway, thank you for coming today.